So, so how long ago did we meet?
I think 6 months
Yeah,
or five.
yeah. And so, what have we been talking about this whole time?
I would say we haven't been talking about much.
Right. So, what do you think someone would say if they were sort of listening to the conversations we had? What subject do you think they would say this was about?
I think if I were to tell anybody, I would just say it's about life.
Yeah,
And I think that's what most people would say as well.
yeah. So, have you noticed a transition since we've been talking?
Yes. I think it's kind of noticeable after the fact.
Mm,
So it's like a force that's moving subconsciously. And the effects come way after in the timeline, if you want to speak in that way.
yeah. So, what do you mean by the timeline? So, what is the timeline?
Time as in days, months, weeks
Yeah,
in the storyline.
the storyline.
Yes.
Whose story is it? So, how would you explain that to somebody who has never been involved in a conversation like this? How would you explain what you mean when you say storyline? Because you're not talking about a storybook, right?
No, I would say storyline as in what this body mind seems to do and how it can interpret that later after what's been happening.
Hmm.
So the idea of the ideas of life. So if we're talking about life, we're always talking about right now. However, there seems to be the ability to remember, and if I remember as right now I am, I would say there's a storyline. But again, I can only talk about that as an idea that I'm recalling right now.
Right. So the storyline that you're referring to might be like Alma's past and her problems and her successes and the events of her life. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of like the movements that she's doing, that she's going about,
Right.
the way that things manifest for her,
Yeah.
the way things look. Again, all interpretations, but it's like saying that this looks pink.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I
So
would
you're
say.
saying that the events of Alma's life, the storyline that you can recall now in this moment, right? Or that can be
Yeah.
recalled, yeah, it would be called a story. So are you saying it's not real? That story, like that story itself, the story of Alma, her life and her past, is that real or is it?
It's as real as it can be right now.
Yeah,
Not sure how real it is.
yeah,
If it's real only right now.
right. Do you think that that perception was the same way when we met?
No, when we met, it was different. It was more It seemed more solid.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to be like a bag full of heavy rocks.
Yeah.
That's what it seemed like in that moment. Presently, it seemed like there was a burden being carried, and it seemed like we were talking to unload that burden. That's what it seemed like.
Right.
And that's something that I'm recalling right now
Mm-hmm.
as a story.
Yeah. So who's recalling that story? Because, you know, when you say it's a story, like Alma's life is a story, it almost sounds like it's not your story, whoever's recalling it right now.
Well, it's not, because I can't really know that.
Why can't you know that?
Because if I look, I can't find that story. I can't hold on to it. I can't grab it and show it and prove it in any way.
And is that unsettling?
Not at all.
No?
No. It's kind of like,
You don't want that story back? Like you don't feel like that helps you navigate your own life, knowing where you're coming from and where you're going?
no.
No? Why not?
Because I'm not going anywhere and I didn't come from anywhere.
Is that unsettling?
No.
Someone who someone I could imagine would hear that they would put their self in your shoes and say, I don't feel like I'm going anywhere and I don't feel like I came from anywhere, that could be unsettling to them. What would you say to them?
So it seems like we're always becoming. We're always in the act of becoming. Becoming blank. And the blank is always changing, but what fills the blank is always changing, but the blank is always there as a blank. So we're in constant movement, but we never settle. So maybe it is unsettling, but that's not a problem, because that's how it looks. Unsettling, always. Even the idea that something could solidify and become is itself a movement, because you can only be becoming. So you're never settled, always unsettled.
So is that what's happening there in that body mind?
It seems so, but even that is a description of that comes after. There's just movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't find myself in that, no matter where I look, because it's always moving. So it's like trying to photograph a shooting star. Like it passes by so quickly that you really can't take a picture. I've tried that
Yeah.
and it didn't work. And so it's like this just shooting stars all the time. And yet even just like perceiving that movement, like that's not even it. That's more movement. So trying to describe it and talk about it is itself the movement.
Yeah.
So it's like
Is there anything,
we can never put our finger on it.
right? Is there anything that's not the movement?
If I were to use words, I'd say there's a stillness that is when the movement is seen as movement, on only movement. There's stillness in that seeing.
Is there anyone seeing it?
No,
Is that uncomfortable?
no. It's just still.
So are we talking about spirituality?
I don't know. I don't know what that is.
No. Did you used to know what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the storyline, it seems that a character called Alma used to do spiritual practices.
Yeah. What was she trying to get out of it?
Some relief.
Yeah. Did she find that relief?
No.
No.
She still hasn't found it. She
Right.
might still be looking.
Yeah.
Like, it changes. Sometimes she likes it, sometimes she doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes she gets really angry with it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem very hopeful. It doesn't seem-
So you say that's funny because you say that Alma started this spiritual journey and worked really hard and wants to find the end to suffering and relief, and then you say that she may not find it and it seems not particularly hopeful, yet you laugh at that and you look completely carefree. Can you explain that? I don't see distress there. I don't see concern at all. How do you explain that? Because this used to be distressing to Alma, didn't it? Right? This idea that this suffering might never end, right? If you asked her about that 3 months ago, that might be really distressing to her because she was obviously seeking an end to that suffering, right? I can tell you personally that that would have been a bother to her, but it doesn't seem to be a bother to you right now.
Well, all I can say is that right now Alma doesn't seem real.
Oh, I see. So you're saying like not only that she has a story from the past that you can remember right now, but she's not even really real. So what about other people, other characters in the story? Are they less real or more real than Alma?
And they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
They just appear when they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're real when they appear, but when they disappear, they're not real anymore.
So would you say that Alma's spiritual, I'm not wanting, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what you just said, it's like Alma's spiritual journey or her journey of becoming didn't necessarily end or doesn't have to end, but it was realized that she's sort of a dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's the dreamer?
There is none. There's just dream.
There's just dreaming.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
Not at all. There's dreaming and there's nowhere to locate it. There's nowhere to find even the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Only right now, maybe.
And when you say there's nowhere to find a dream, could it be said that there's also no one to look for it?
Yeah.
Right. Is this a comfortable state?
It's beyond comfort and discomfort. It doesn't even know what that is.
Mm-hmm. Is it a state?
No.
Right.
It's not in time. It just seems to permeate everything else.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's hard to achieve this non-state?
It's not achievable.
Right. Why is that?
Because the movement can never see itself. Can't stop moving.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in that realm of achieving,
Mm-hmm.
forgetting, or accomplishing, or doing.
So then there's this idea about like a spiritual path or a spiritual journey, right? That many people take very seriously. I did for a long time. You know, what would you say about that? Like, what advice do you have for that?
I think Alma has a questioning heart. It's almost like being like, imagine living in like a glass cube and not thinking that there's no glass cube, and yet you see everything that's it, like right through it because it's glass and it's clear. And yet every time you try to touch things, you hit a wall and you hit a glass. And then something happens and something starts to crack and you see the cracks and you start to doubt and question.
Does that questioning have value, do you think?
Yeah, I think the questions are what crack the glass. And when it cracks, maybe the vision gets blurrier
Mm-hmm.
because you see the cracks, but the cracks show that there seems to be a veil. So it shows the presence of a seeming veil. And then the more the more it cracks, and there's no one to crack it, but somehow an unknowable force that comes from somewhere unknowable just cracks it. And I'd say it's sincerity. Sincerity and authenticity, and that's not something, those aren't qualities that you just wake up and say, I'm going to be truthful today or sincere or honest. It's really being truthful, because if you say I am truthful, then what does that even mean? What does that look like? You can't imagine what truth is, because that's more imagination.
Mm-hmm. So then how do you orient yourself to truth? Or how could that happen, do you think? If you can't do it by intention, like
just honesty of whatever is happening right now.
mm-hmm.
I'd say be honest about it.
Yeah.
Be honest about it in the body, and then that from there, when you're honest about it within this body mind, if I'm honest about it, then it flows from there and it manifests seemingly out there. But the honesty begins inside. And the sincerity, it's really just, it's felt. You can't try to be sincere. All you can do is show up, and that's it.
Would you call that surrender?
Yeah.
But there's not really anyone to surrender.
Surrender, I'd say it's like free falling. Like it's almost like surrender is an effect that somehow is perceived after, because when when you say surrender, for me it feels like just like slipping off a cliff. That's what surrender is. I think sincerity is what gets you to the edge of the cliff, and then surrender is when you just slip.
Mm-hmm.
And slipping isn't intentional.
Mm-hmm.
There's no intention about it. There's no will in it. It's just the sincerity really pushes. It makes the ground slippery. So things might be getting worse in the storyline, more unsettling, because the truth about unsettling being how things are becomes revealed. So then that's kind of a shock to the belief in settling and in something solid and something that's become arrived. That doesn't, I found that to not be real. So it's always a movement.
So the belief that you or Alma was going to arrive somewhere, or that things were going to finally settle, turned out to not be true.
No, at all.
Yeah. And then strangely, there was a freedom in that, would you say?
Yeah.
In that realization that comes upon you.
Yeah.
Or comes upon itself.
But it's a it's a stillness beyond unsettled and settled.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the opposite of unsettled.
Right.
It's being settled within unsettled.
Mm-hmm. Like they're almost the same thing.
Yeah. So I say movement, but really there's no movement.
Mm-hmm.
When you are the movement, there is no movement, because you don't know yourself outside of the movement. You can't find yourself in the movement.
Mm-hmm.
You can't find yourself outside or inside, because there is no outside or inside. It's just moving. And in that moving, there's no movement.
So you're saying everything is moving and is completely still at the same time.
Yeah.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
It's not supposed to.
Right. Yeah. And then you also said that this, whatever this is, whatever's, I guess, perceived in this moment, is outside of time, or you said it's eternal.
But even eternal is thinking in terms of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
So
it's
then
not
what's
something that it can't be remembered.
right?
It can't be said. It can't be put in a time frame.
Mm-hmm.
It's just noticed
Mm-hmm.
at some point by
So
no one. It's just noticed
so it's almost like nothing's really going on right now,
at all.
right?
Nothing.
Because there's no time in which it's going to happen. That takes a lot away when there's no future and no past. There's nothing solid here because it's all changing.
Yeah,
But there's no time in which it can change, so then it's completely still.
exactly. It's like being dazed, like being just like blinded by the sun.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is what people are looking for when they're on a spiritual path?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know it.
I know.
So they think they're looking for something, but they're really looking for nothing,
Mm-hmm.
which is maybe what we're talking about.
See, but doesn't nothing sound bad? Like you find nothing, you realize you aren't anything. I mean, it seems kind of empty, right? At the least, it's anticlimactic. Why would anyone want that?
So for the character, there's a lot of helplessness there
Mm-hmm.
because it perceives that it's outside of the movement and it needs the movement to stop for some reason and it can't. So I remember once when Alma felt empty. And it was really bad news.
It was bad for Elma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
Because she was expecting something to fill that seeming emptiness.
Mm.
And she was interpreting it. It was
As,
very heartbreaking.
like interpreting it as referring to her,
Yeah.
like her emptiness.
It was a disillusionment.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned helplessness or disillusionment. What do you think of those?
Well, I think they're wonderful.
Great.
I love those.
Mm-hmm. What do you think one of the, as far as on the scale of the emotions people don't want to feel, where do you think helplessness falls? In general, just the general, you're smart about, you know people well. So the feeling of helplessness, where do you think that ranks for people as far as what they do or don't want to feel?
Pretty high.
Yeah, as far as not wanting to feel it.
Yeah, and I feel like helplessness underlies just the notion of not wanting to feel.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's associated with that idea or that belief of, or that contraction to not feel. So even helplessness is an idea because
But how about the pain that corresponds to it in the body?
helplessness implies that the pain is a problem that
Right.
must be solved. That's what it does. The pain honestly, it's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
We're so much more capable of holding great amounts of pain that we imagine we can't hold, but actually we can, because in this moment that's all there is. There's pain. What causes us to suffer and feel helpless and contract around it is when we start to extrapolate and to imagine that the pain is just going to drag out for X amount of minutes, days, months, and that there's going to be no end to it. So we believe that it began and it's going to end. So we sort of take it away, we isolate it, and that's not painful. That's where the helplessness arises. So we make too much of a big deal of pain.
Mm-hmm.
When in the body it's very simple. There'll be movement to relieve it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even that's not a problem. It's a great doorway, pain.
Yeah. Yeah, you said you love it.
I
Love.
do.
You said you love it. Love
I think
helplessness.
humans are pain averse, and yet they look for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we didn't know pain, we wouldn't know pleasure.
Mm-hmm. How about shame? How do you feel about shame?
I think shame is like murky water
Mm-hmm.
that we really don't want to step into because we don't know what's in there.
Mm-hmm. What happens when we go in there, or when we're willing to
When we go into shame,
give it life?
we're definitely going to feel helpless. I mean, helplessness is almost like the door to all these emotions that we don't want to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So we will feel helpless. But in shame, there's an impulse to hide, to shut away. There's beliefs of, I'm not okay. This is not okay. And it's very dark in shame.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what the perception is for most people.
Mm-hmm. What have you found with your exploration of it?
Well, in shame goes also humiliation, which it hurts because we're holding on to something. And it's almost like we know we're pretending, and that's why we feel ashamed and we feel humiliated, because somewhere inside we know that we're pretending to be other than we are.
So would you say that for somebody who's interested in finding a deeper truth in themselves, or they take, say, what they call spirituality seriously, would you say this is a good place to explore? I mean, is it valuable?
Definitely. I don't want to say what it's like, because
Right.
then I'm sort of like giving away the ending.
No, I know. It's okay. You can give away the ending. It's all right. We already know where it ends.
Because if we say I'm going to feel shame to get over it, or to overcome it, or to see the light at the end of the tunnel, then we're not feeling shame.
Yeah, say more about that.
We're just holding on to this, again, to the future, that this is going to go away. We're using feeling shame as a strategy to avoid shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to say that,
well, we're already avoiding it, right? Like, that's the default. Very,
right,
very clearly, we default to avoiding shame.
right. And then we know that it can be avoided, that it's eventually it can be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
So because it keeps slapping us in the face over and over,
Right.
we really can't run from it. It's just, it catches up to us quicker than we run.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, shame comes from innocence.
Mm-hmm.
So right in the center of it, there's innocence. But I don't want to say that because we can't believe that. We can't hold that as a belief because
Right.
we use that as a strategy to not feel it, because we're expecting, if I feel shame, if I open the doors, then I'm going to get to some place somewhere called innocence sometime in the future. And that's a lie.
Well, it is, but it's also not opening the door to shame.
Exactly.
Yeah. To
It's
believe you
just,
opened the door to shame to get over shame that's not what we're talking
you're opening the door to the idea of shame and the idea of innocence, but that's not what it is. Those are just words.
Yeah. You're opening the door to your heart to find that you can give life to and find home in shame for as long as that is required for
Yeah.
the rest of your life. Doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
There's room here for shame.
Yeah.
There's room here for it to be everything it needs to be alive, to be accepted, to be validated.
And you sort of melt into it. You sort of dissolve into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like this, you recognize an inherent resilience.
You kind of meet yourself there,
Yeah.
a different part of yourself that's been hidden for a long, long, long time.
But this part, it's so willing to feel it.
Mm-hmm. So now have you gotten over shame?
No, it still comes by.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not even described or categorized as shame.
Mm-hmm. It's only called shame from the perspective of the doorway that you don't want to enter.
Yeah.
Right.
But I don't even have a choice of whether I'm entering that or not. The door is just open and I walk. I don't even see a door.
Yeah. It looks
There's no
different. It
door.
looks different from the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's held always, no matter what. And it honestly, it loves you.
Mm-hmm.
It just like, it's gonna hug you. It's gonna embrace you. You don't even have to embrace it. It's gonna embrace you. You don't have to welcome it. It's gonna welcome you.
Where are these words coming from?
No clue.
Are these your words?
No.
Do you believe them?
No. Not at all. They're flimsy.
Mm-hmm.
They're just words.
Mm-hmm.
Stories. Ideas. Images.
What did these ideas, images, and stories arise and fall inside of?
This.
Mm-hmm.
Here.
Why do you just call it this?
I could call it a bunch of things, but it's just this.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing more, nothing less.
Mm-hmm. Is it enough?
It's never enough. And it's always enough. It's enoughness.
Mm-hmm.
There's no caliber.
Yeah. Does it have an agenda?
Agendas can arise, but this doesn't have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't own an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Can notice agendas. But again, agendas are like stories. They just crash. They're very, very fragile. And it's seen that there's no one to have an agenda, but there can be agendas.
Mm-hmm. So is this this undescribable or indescribable present non-experience, is this enlightenment?
I don't know what enlightenment is.
No? How about awakening? Can you wake up to this?
No, not at all. Like you can't wake up because there's no time.
Right.
It's not gonna happen. It's not an event. There's effects, yes, and maybe you call those effects an event because things seem to shift. But even the word shift, it comes after.
Mm-hmm.
The changes are just, it seems that things change because that's what manifests, and that's the interpretation of something that never occurs. There's just effects. That's all we can talk about. We can only talk about the effects. That's it.
Yeah.
Because words fail to describe whatever isn't an effect.
So what if somebody told you, Alma, I think that you are enlightened? What would you say to that?
I would laugh.
What would you say if somebody said, Alma, I don't think you're enlightened?
I would also find that funny.
Why
I would think they're right, because they're right.
Yeah. What is the big deal with enlightenment? Why is it such a bad word in spirituality? Like in Zen, your Zen master hits you with a stick if we talk about enlightenment or ask about it. Yet, everybody seems to be sitting there trying to get to it. What's that about? Like people work really hard. Really, they do. They work really, really hard. They meditate for years and years and join ashrams and temples and give up everything they have. They leave their some people leave their families. Literally, they give up their worldly possessions, give up worldly pursuits, family,
That's
sex.
all. That's all a story.
That's all in the story.
Those are all.
But they think they're going to get something called enlightenment, right?
Enlightenment is a story, also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can tell yourself you got it if that satisfies you.
Or your students or your followers, or.
But it's like putting on it's like just putting on another mask.
Mm-hmm.
Enlightenment is just that, another mask.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually more separation from this.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't call it enlightenment.
Right.
Because there's already light. It's like it already is. It can't be reached.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like you can't enter a room you never left, sort of thing.
yeah, it's more of an illusion to believe that you can, because you're already there.
Mm-hmm.
You're already moving and not moving.
So what would you say to all this? Like anyone who's seeking this? I mean, they really think.
I would say question it. Ask, what is enlightenment? Ask that inside.
Mm-hmm.
Close your eyes and just look inside. What is enlightenment? And who wants it?
Who wants it? That's a good question, isn't it?
What does enlightenment look like when you ask that? Maybe there's descriptors. Look at those.
Mm-hmm. This kind of goes back to what you were saying about being honest, right?
Exactly.
Look at what you're actually orienting yourself toward, or what you secretly think you're going to get out of it.
Exactly. So kind of calling your own bluff, exposing yourself, questioning.
Back to
And
humiliation.
then you see that, yes, that's a constant humiliation. And then slowly the questioner starts to fall away. And humiliation is easy because there's no one, no questioner, no entity being humiliated. There's just humiliation, if that happens, if that arises.
And then there's no one left to give a shit whether there's enlightenment or not.
Exactly.
Nice. Do you feel a sense of gratitude in this?
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
To everything. Even the idea of enlightenment, I can be grateful to that. Even suffering.
Where's the best teacher? Who's the best teacher? Where's the best? If you feel oriented toward finding a teacher or a specific type of teaching or figuring out
I think
what's the best path for you, where would you orient somebody who is thinking that way?
I think when sincerity starts to flower, the instincts really start to work well. And I would say follow the instinct, follow the gut. That's all I ever did. And that's just about being sincere. And slowly what starts to happen is it's like a prayer that it's like come what may. And you start to realize that you are taken care of, and that what's fueling the seeming path isn't you, it's the sincerity. That's it.
Mm-hmm. So now
it's taken its own momentum. And I feel like it has a snowball effect, so it gets more and more momentum as the sincerity ramps up.
Mm-hmm. So what's left now?
Nothing changed really.
Mm-hmm.
The life is the same. Alma has preferences. Those are intact. They didn't change. Personality didn't change. Maybe it can, I guess, but that's a normal human growth, like maturation. Personality can change, can alter. Preferences can change, but it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
That just appears in the moment. And it can't even be perceived as a change, because to be perceived as a change, you would have to compare it to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just this inclination to taste this over and over and over, and find where it seems to not be tasted, and go there
Mm-hmm.
and offer it so I can taste it fully. That's all. The movement continues. There's no end.
Mm-hmm.
It has a domino effect. It goes to find all the doors that are locked. It goes to open them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nobody doing that. That's what it does.
Does it do that? Does it look for those doors in the future?
No, the doors literally just appear
Mm-hmm.
in the manifestation, seemingly.
Mm-hmm.
They just come up and they're opened by no one, for
Mm-hmm.
no one.
It's pretty beautiful, isn't it?
And the deepening continues.
Mm-hmm.
It's never over. There's no end. Enlightenment sounds like an end to something.
Yeah. Well, it sort of sounds like you gain something.
Like
Like
you gain something, or like you just stabilize a state or something,
Mhm.
but that's
like
not true.
as we talked
States come and go all the time.
like as we talked all this time over the last several months, did you feel like Alma was learning something, like gaining knowledge?
No, she was definitely losing something.
Hmm.
There was just more and more lightness. It felt just like going about smoother, even in the worst of circumstances. And
What do you think the
f-
biggest thing she lost was?
what do you mean by that?
What do you think the most salient part of what fell away was, or what was lost? Or seen not to be as real as it was thought to be?
The obsession with Alma.
Hmm.
The problematic aspect to Alma.
Would you say Alma's better taken care of in how things are now, or in that intense focus on Alma?
She is, and yet we can never know what taken care of even means.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like anything. There's no such thing as, there's no evidence for being taken care of. It's just, it's unknown.
Hmm.
It's known in the unknown.
Hmm.
Taken care of doesn't mean good health or
Hmm. So
money.
what about
No,
these, like what about these bodies, these body minds in this moment? What do you what do you perceive? Like what do you directly perceive about their nature?
they're like holograms.
Hmm. Does it mean you don't want to take care of it, or that it doesn't matter?
It's effortless. It gets taken care of.
Hmm.
And the movement moves in the direction of taking care of.
What does that feel like? How it's taken care of? How does that feel?
Like a huge relief.
Hmm.
Like just being held.
Yeah. Are you worried about anything happening or not happening in the future?
No. I mean, worry comes in glimpses, but
Hmm.
it's not, it crashes really quickly. It sort of like explodes.
Hmm.
And
It has its place.
yeah,
Not it's not excluded.
worry, concern,
Hmm.
preoccupation, anxiety, like all those, they're fine, but they don't seem to impede anything, the movement, or invade
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
They don't take it over. They're not seen as separate, so they can arise, but they're just there. They're not a problem. There's no need to get rid of them.
So I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, what advice would you give somebody who really is just genuinely suffering and senses that there's something not right about themselves or their life, or the suffering, like they really really hurt and they feel like they really would want to investigate something that would alleviate that suffering, but maybe they feel like most of the ways that that happens in ordinary life don't seem to work, not permanently.
And I would
Like,
say
like they
stop.
have an aching heart. What would you say to somebody like that?
Stop. Just stop. Whatever that looks like, stop. If you can't stop, stop. Stop.
Stop what?
What does it feel like in the body when I say stop?
To me? Are you asking me, or are you saying that's what you would?
I'm just saying.
Correct. Yeah.
What happens is things are seen.
Mm-hmm.
Movements are seen. Agendas are seen. They can be carried through, but awareness starts to flow to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like shining a light
Yeah.
onto the suffering.
It's kind of like stop running.
Yeah, allowing it to be. And even if there's running, allowing that too. But what starts to happen is slowly there's lost interest in running.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the running gets more intense because that sort of, for me, the running got more intense.
Mm-hmm.
And that just tired me out more. But that had a profound effect. The exhaustion really, really is what causes stop. So even if you seem to be pushing and scrambling and tugging, if that feels authentic, then do that consciously.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to become aware of what you're doing and what's going on. You don't lie to yourself about it anymore. It doesn't mean it stops, but you can see it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be guilt, but with awareness on it, the guilt starts to dissolve because it's just movement.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has to change. Things could look the same. But the suffering is a door. So if we try to take it away, it's like blinding ourselves to the door,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps it closed. So trying to take away suffering just keeps the door closed, really.
Mm-hmm.
Just turns you in the other direction, away from the door, and the door remains closed. So I say, smash your head into it. That's gonna happen eventually, because the body mind can only take so much suffering
Mm-hmm.
before it seems to just collapse. And that's true. So I'm not saying go and do suffering if you're enjoying your life and everything seems calm, but suffering is intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
It has an intelligence. It wears you out. It wears what's not real out.
So would you recommend going to like find suffering, or think through your mind, go search through your mind and find things that make you suffer and try to investigate them that way?
I mean, there's thousands of resources,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking, and I would say definitely if it feels sincere, go for it. Go after it, whatever it is. If it feels sincere, it's going to lead you home. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to lead you to the door. And maybe as a side effect, it will alleviate suffering, but that's not really what you want. That's not really what you're looking for when you try to alleviate it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it does.
You're saying when you're trying to alleviate suffering, that's not exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, not really.
What are you looking for?
You're looking for something that can be known.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking for
You're saying it can't be found.
can be found. Yeah.
Why is that? Why can't you find it?
Because you don't exist. You don't exist. That's why you can't find it.
Mm-hmm. You're saying the you that feels like it's searching, seeking.
Yeah, the me. Me doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. And you could also sort of say it in a way that sounds different, but it's actually the same thing, and that is, it's never been lost.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's there in all the
So,
movement, in all the doingness, in all the moving around and finding and looking for. It's there,
so like in the
right
tiny
in front of your face.
misperception of separation, something arises called me that spends its entire life looking for the missing piece inside of what's never been missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's even in that missing piece, in that space where the missing piece, that space where the missing piece is supposed to fit into, that's where it is. Look there.
That's a good answer. So, what is the role of love in all of this? Because it sounds pretty empty, like there's nothing here, right? There's no substance to what is. There's just this, but this doesn't seem to be in time.
The best way I can say it is that love is your guardian angel. It's always there. And it's sort of like showing you that you're not alone in your aloneness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's calling you towards emptiness, aloneness, nothingness. But it's giving you the courage to get there, to open to that, to be willing to see that.
And so when it opens, this emptiness opens, or you open to the emptiness, or dissolve into it, or find that it's just what it has always been, however you want to say it, is that lonely? Is that a lonely place?
No.
It's not.
No, because love is holding you there.
Mm-hmm. Because it's nothing at all, right? But what about all this stuff? Like when you look around, you see the world. What is that?
Well, that's where love can move. That's a reflection that's always pointing.
What's it pointing to?
To the emptiness within all of that.
Mm-hmm. But is it only emptiness?
I would say so.
Mm-hmm. There also seems to be a bit of like kind of a fullness to it, right? Seems kind of full, and it kind of hurts, right?
So love allows all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The fullness, the hurt,
Yeah.
the seeming reality of things that aren't real.
So yeah, it's like the emptiness is sort of a mystery, right? Mystery.
Yeah.
It's a big question mark. So there's that, and then there's something that seems like fullness, right? You know, it's felt. We don't know who it's felt by, but you can feel it. Sadness, happiness, pain, guilt, shame, wind, water, love, lust, all those, they're felt. And the nature is empty. So it's empty and it's full, and those aren't two. Those can only be divided out as separate in the mind. So there's the empty fullness and love, which makes it all move. or it's the way the movement of it all feels, to my perception at least. It's not a bad reality.
Love is just it is the playing, it's the play. It's the dancing, it's the sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
The sweetness in being alive.
Mm-hmm. Does that sweetness go when there's pain?
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I find so much love in the center of pain.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why we even seek pain unconsciously. We look for it, we go towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's love moving us. It's met. In the pain, love is met.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to end unless you have anything else to say.
No.
Thanks for taking time to talk.